What's up, UX fam? How's your mom and them? Welcome to another episode of Beyond UX Design. I'm Jeremy. If you're new here, welcome to the show. I am super stoked to have you. This week's episode is brought to you by Mento Design Academy, where it's not just about learning UX design, it's about discovering your unique path in it. Their approach is different. It's personal. It's tailored to you. They don't just teach, they inspire students to use their passions as a driving force in their learning. And that is something that I've experienced firsthand as a mentor. I've been fortunate enough to guide students who are exploring concepts that they're truly passionate about. It's not just about following a curriculum, it's about shaping that curriculum around what excites each student. And this approach emphasizes not just knowledge, but a deep love for the discipline. And seeing my mentees grow, apply their passions, and craft portfolios that are genuinely them, it's been one of the most rewarding experiences of my career. So if you're looking for a UX course that's as unique as you are, check out Mento Design Academy. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/Mento. And just for my listeners, use the promo code BeyondUX200 to get $200 off the course. So join Mento and let your passions lead your learning journey. And if you haven't done already, please consider subscribing to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. If you are a regular here and you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would really appreciate you leaving a 5-star review. That'll help me out so much more than you can imagine. And as always, thanks so much to Chris, Sarah, Quan, Stacy, Rodney, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, and Kevin for all their support. And if you want to join those fine folks and help keep the show independent and ad-free, you can become a patron for as little as $3 a month. That's less than $1 an episode. And if you do that, you'll get some sweet, sweet perks for your support. And of course, if you think this show is worth sharing, then I would love it if you told some friends. I feel like that intro is getting longer every episode. I just gotta take a breath. All right. So lots of junior designers out there, career shifters, that aren't sure exactly where to focus. Should I be a generalist? Should I be a specialist? Should I target a specific niche? Am I a T-shaped designer? How do I get there? What do I need to know? Where do I need to focus? Where do I start? Those are questions that a lot of junior designers tend to ask themselves. So I've got one of my good friends, Laura Baker, on, and we're going to talk all about that today. So I am really excited to have Laura on the show. Laura, where's your bio? Where did I put it? Did I scroll down? Oh, I scrolled too far. Sorry. So I'm excited to have Laura Baker on the show today. With a background in industrial design, Laura has spent the last few years working with notable design agencies in the UK and the US, leading and building embedded design teams and project work with highly complex organizations. She has a wealth of experience in consulting and providing strategic thinking and execution across e-commerce, education, pharma, and financial clients. And she joined Fierce to kick off and oversee service and business design, UX, and user research across the company, and now oversees the design across the agency. Laura, welcome to Beyond UX Design. I am so excited to have you on. How's it going?
I'm good, thank you. Excited to be here as well. Appreciate you having me on here. Good, it's a good topic, I think, to be talking about. And also, I mean, you kind of introed it as all of these problems that junior designers have, and I don't think these problems ever go away. I think designers at all levels are asking themselves the same question. So hopefully there'll be some value from this conversation for anyone that's listening. But we'll see how we go.
Absolutely. I completely agree. As someone who's been in this field for a long time, I ask myself these types of questions almost daily. It's kind of like a midlife design crisis. I don't know. But anyway, so Laura, I'm really excited to have you on because I feel like this is something you see all the time on places like LinkedIn and social media in general, YouTube, wherever. People are always asking themselves, like, do I target a thing? Do I not? So we're going to talk about that today. And I'm really excited to get your input here. And you've got a lot of experience. I read your bio there a little bit, but why don't you tell everybody listening out there a little bit about you and how'd you get into this, or how'd you come to understand this topic and get some good insights on it?
I mean, we've got a bit of time, but I think we'll save it for the juicier stuff rather than the stuff about me. So I'll try and give you the short version. But yeah, as you said, started off in industrial design. Probably spent about a year or so working in industrial. Didn't love it, didn't hate it. Long story short, found myself thinking about this thing called UX. Kind of went, digital sounds like it could be the future. Sounds like it could be fun. Let's kind of give it a go. And long story short, I went in for a 2-week sort of internship, I think, and the rest, as they say, is kind of history, really. But I think just in terms of the topic of the day, what I think is interesting is there's at least from my experience of working in there, there's quite a big difference in terms of industrial design and kind of the digital design space in terms of this idea of generalist and specialist. And that was really
Mm,
one of the key things for me in moving from one to the other is very much the industrial design space, at least at that time, there weren't many specialists. There were very niche specialists in sort of like CAD, for example, but very typically you worked kind of end to end as an industrial designer. And the opportunity to move into UX was this idea that I could go into the bit of design that I kind of like doing a bit more, and could leave what is kind of in the digital world, the UI and the visual stuff, to people that were a hell of a lot better and well, just enjoyed it more than I did because I'm useless when it comes to color, quite frankly. So there's huge benefits in this idea of generalists and specialists, and this idea, I think, of being able to really dive into the areas that you want. But at the same time, I do think there's some drawbacks. I think I was kind of shameless shout out here, but I was talking to some members of our 50, which is our design leadership community, the other day, and this kind of idea came up in a different context. But in industrial design, you're more generalist and you're also a hell of a lot closer to sort of you do the form and the function. And I
mm,
think this kind of idea of specialism comes with a lot of benefits, as I said, but it can also take you away. And what we were talking about is actually in digital, we're a lot further from kind of where the money is, so like the commercial side and the means of production, and what that
mm.
actually does to design and the perspective of design. We were talking about it from a product, but no, we're not versus, sorry, a product times product by design kind of
Hmm.
context, and all the issues that are kind of circling around the kind of product discipline and the design discipline. So I think there's, to circle it back, some great things about being specialist that it comes with, but it can also come with some potential negative effects as well, which we'll get into discussing, I know.
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. That's actually a really interesting way that you've sort of framed it a little bit. You mentioned like putting it gets us away from the means of the production and stuff, and it. I don't know. It just sounds like I don't know if that conversation went towards like Karl Marx and like a Marxist kind of slant to it or anything, but it sounds like a fascinating conversation to have over some beers for sure. I feel like that actually that would make like a really interesting topic for an episode on its own. But anyway, so one of the things that I'm kind of curious about, and you mentioned like industrial design. When I think about industrial design, I don't think of 1,000 job titles. I think of like industrial designer. And when I think about UX design, you mentioned, specifically you called out in your example, like there's people who do the UI and the visual design. And I immediately thought of, UX UI, UX UI, and UX UI is sort of like the master generalist. It's literally all of the things in one job title. And then you break off into, very specific titles like, interaction designer or visual designer or researcher and all these other things. I'm kind of curious, like from your perspective, when you think about this and you think about this idea of generalist versus specialist, and you think about industrial design as a generalist, I'm curious, is there like a connection there from your perspective that has to do with job titles? And is this a good or bad thing? Has it been less confusing? Does it make it easier to understand or maybe more confusing? Because I have thoughts there, but I want to hear what you think.
Oh, there are so many thoughts. I mean, the biggest bridge, right, is the first time that I heard a digital person calling themselves a product designer, because traditionally that was
Mm,
kind of another name for a digital designer. So now it's this kind of idea of digital product design and physical product design. So,
mm-hmm.
well, yeah, that there's the titles thing is just one of the most confusing parts of this whole industry, and I think it's confusing for the people that are in it, let alone the people outside of it. I mean, yeah, you've got UX, UI. How does that then compare to a product designer, for example? You see people calling themselves UX strategists or digital strategists. Is that the same as a service designer? Then you can go
Mm,
US, UK. Is the service designer mean the same thing if you go
right.
from one
Yeah,
country
absolutely.
to another? And typically it's a yeah, sometimes yes, sometimes no. And literally
Right.
the only way you can figure someone out, we've got people in the talent team, they'll be like, so this person has this job title. What do they actually do? And I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna have to look at their LinkedIn and then I will tell you. Because until you actually look at someone's like LinkedIn or their CV and you actually try and understand what they're talking about and the type of work they do, titles are just they're so
Hmm.
confusing. And I, to the point earlier, it's really nice that people have the flexibility to go niche in terms of what they do and what they specialize in and what their strengths are. And you can really kind of mold something to that. And I think there's so much opportunity in that. But as an industry, we're so bad at talking about it, and we're so bad at kind of raising it up to kind of a surface level, to the point where just saying, hey, can we just talk about design? We had a stakeholder that just said, like, I don't care what kind of design you are, can you do the
Hmm.
job? And that's kind of what we expect from other industries. And if we go back to that conversation I was talking about when we were talking about means of production, and like another thing was this kind of almost like artificial um, idea of all these roles that have been put in as people have specialized, and the silos that that's then created, and the problems not just within design but then within product and tech and how people work across those, and it just gets really confusing is the short answer to it all.
Yeah, and I'm going back and I'm thinking about this. The one thing I've always thought about, the idea of specialist, generalist, job titles and how that all ties together. And I think to myself, like, ultimately, why is this conversation important? Why are we even thinking about it, and why does it matter in the first place? And the thing that I go back to is it matters because when we go to get jobs, what we call ourselves and the things that we do obviously matter because we need to find the right company that needs the skills that we have so we can actually get the work done and provide a service to them so they can pay us at the end of the day. And one of the things I think about, this is the trope, I guess, is like go and look up, product designer at 10 job listings, and they're all going to say very different things. There's going to be some overlap, but at the end of the day, a lot of them are going to have very different specifics about what it is that you'll actually need to do. And I think about, like in other industries like medicine, for instance, like you've got a doctor, right? And that could literally be anything. Like, what does a doctor do? You could have an ENT that looks at your ear, nose, throat. You have a podiatrist that only looks at feet. You have like a, internal medicine that only does this. But like, you could say they're all doctors, but at the end of the day, they're all doing very different things. And I think about like, if I went to get a job as a doctor at a hospital, and all they had on the thing was like doctor, like, well, what kind of doctor, like it's what do you actually do? And it's something like I don't know, it's just it's kind of interesting because like as a junior designer, what I call myself should be reflective of the things that I can do, but I don't, when I only see product designer, I don't know what I should be doing, and I think there's a lot of confusion there. I'm wondering if you talk a little bit about that and what this I guess disconnect means for junior designers. Like, what does it actually end up doing to harm them in their career long term when we can't agree on this stuff?
I think kind of harms all of us rather than just junior designers, but I think it just
Mm,
adds more confusion for people coming in. Like, where do I sit? How do I pitch myself? Do, like, to your point earlier, do we start off as a generalist or do you start off as a specialist? Typically, I'd say my advice, like, just come in as a generalist. I think you
mm,
learn more. I think people come in as a specialist more so if they're coming in from something else where they've already got certain skill sets. Like if you're coming in from a graphic design background, then you're probably more likely to just go straight into kind of visual design. But that's not necessarily the case. And I think the benefit of starting off more generalist, I mean, quite frankly, right now with the market, there's more roles available for you. So that's a bonus. Um, if you don't kind of niche yourself down into one area. But I also think if you're experiencing for the first something for the first time, why not experience it all? Like find out what you like, what you're good at, because both of those things are really important in terms of shaping your career going forward. So try not to niche yourself down too early. I think the one thing that I'd say is typically if you look at boot camps and courses, and I probably should have stayed away from those two things because that's a whole episode to it, like a whole series in itself, probably
oh
for
yeah,
you.
for sure.
But I think typically they tend they talk about being quite generalist, but I do think they're typically more UX. I haven't not necessarily seen for myself a boot camp that really goes into the fundamentals of visual design. You will do visual design, but I don't think they really teach it to you as a discipline. It's more just like, hey, here's your double diamonds, here's your research, your personas, etc. Do your journey maps, which is kind of what you see a lot of the kind of cookie cutter portfolios that come out of these things, and then make some screens at the end. And that's your kind of lesson on visual design. But when you actually look at the work that's coming out of it and you kind of see how they've put the screens together, it's probably quite clear that they haven't necessarily been taught the fundamentals around visual design. So yeah, I'd say start generalist. And then you'll be asking yourself what you want to do for the rest of your career, pretty much. But at least
Yeah.
start with a broad base.
Yeah. Well, you said something too, I think is worth maybe digging into a little bit.
Mm.
And as someone who works for a talent, I don't know what you call fearless, I guess, talent acquisition, talent company, a talent, there's probably a word for that. Anyway, somebody who works at a agency that specializes in hiring, you mentioned there's more generalist roles than there are specialist roles. And I'm curious, is that like indicative of anything in particular? Is that, do you think, because, you know, maybe we're getting too deep into this, like from a job hunting and economics perspective. But when I think about what you're saying, I hear like maybe the implications could be like, you know, they don't want to hire more people, so they expect one person to do it all, or maybe they don't know what they want, or they don't know what they need specifically, so they're looking for one or two people to come in and be able to do everything because they aren't exactly sure what they need those people to do. I'm just curious, like, is there anything to unpack there when you see that the industry is looking more for generalist versus specialist?
I mean,
Is
there's
there an insight
huge
there?
number.
I'm curious. Like, what do you
There's
see?
layers upon layers to unpack
This is
with that
probably its
one.
own
So
episode on
let's
its own
go.
too.
Yeah. So yeah, Fearless, we're a design agency, but we've got the talent side of the business as well.
Okay.
But I think in terms of what you were saying, there's a couple of ways to address it. I mean, just take out what's happening in the market. If you don't put yourself into one box and you say, hey, I can fit into multiple boxes, then naturally there are more opportunities for you, whatever the state of
Mm-hmm.
the market is. I think with the state of the market, yeah, it's more generalist because of the whole do more with less. And
Mm-hmm.
the last year or so has been quite frankly horrific for, I think, everyone involved. So when design teams got less budget and are shrinking and are trying to cover as much ground, because quite frankly, the budgets are shrunk, the headcount is shrunk, but priorities haven't really changed for the most part in a lot of places. So they do need people to be a bit more, hate the expression, T-shaped or whatever you want to call them, and be able to kind of
Mm-hmm.
cover more bases with kind of a smaller team to cover that ground. And I think in some ways the kind of specialist thing makes sense because with the complexity of what we do, there's just not enough hours in the day, right? So we could call, to your point around the doctor, like everyone could be a designer, right? But doesn't
Mm-hmm.
mean that you have the capacity to do all of that stuff. So actually, if you break it down to number of people and different jobs, then you can kind of cover um more ground with it. But yeah, I do think that the idea of if you're more of a generalist, then there's probably more opportunity for you right now. But it also depends more holistically where you're at and what kind of it depends where you're at and where you kind of target. So take
Right.
the state of the industry out. You will find that in a more mature organization, typically you have more specialists, and in a less mature, you'd have more generalists. And that's a very broad brushstroke, but that's kind of a thing. So if you've got to know where you're looking and what you're kind of targeting, depending on which route you go down.
Yeah. Now, when you say where you're at, do you think that has something to do with location as well? Like if you're in Europe or Asia or the US, there is a different requirement, or maybe not requirement, perception maybe is a better term, for what a designer should or should not be doing based on region? Or do you mean more like it could also, I could also interpret that as like industry. So like in, industrial enterprise type thing, they're looking for this versus a, small startup tech company is looking for this. I'm curious, do you see differences there? Or I guess it's hard, it's hard to generalize across the entire industry, but I'm curious if you've seen any trends or anything like that from where you are.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to just broadly generalize and probably piss a few people off, but hopefully it'll be okay. You can just edit it out if it's
I won't
like
tell.
too terrible. Um, so two questions, country, region. My first thought was I have no idea. Then thinking about it a little bit more, I do think there's a difference. And I think it comes back to what I was saying about mature and less mature companies. And I think countries are probably quite similar. And I know from working with certain clients that we have, if you look at places like the US and the UK, which are typically thought of as the more mature areas, you can typically find more specialists within those areas, and that's what they tend to look for in those countries. When you go to other areas such as India or going to Asia, the designers, and this is where I could piss a hell of a lot of people off, sorry, but it's typically thought of as a less mature area. Don't I know there is a hell of a lot of great designers out there, but from a industry perspective, that's the view that's held. And typically when you're there, it tends to be more in terms of I'm hiring a generalist kind of end-to-end designer in those kind of locations rather than specialist designers like service designers or whatever else. Your second question around industry, I don't know specifically about industry. Actually, maybe I do. If we go down the like service design route, I think, for example, I can talk about the UK that is service design, like government work. It's very kind of like specialist, and you could do kind of go in there. But in terms of the other thing you mentioned, which I think was scale ups and startups, I think typically, especially in your startups, you would normally have a more generalist designer in there because you've just got less people. And so your kind of like founding designer is someone that you need to kind of, I mean, it's startup life, you've got to wear a lot of hats, right? So just having a deep specialism in one probably isn't going to work for you.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think this goes back to obviously like the thing we always like to say as designers, it depends, and it always depends on a million things, and it's hard to generalize. So, it's a tricky question that I asked you. I think for me, one of the things that I just like to tell anybody I ever talk to, junior designers, is like, it is hard to determine. So if you want something, you have to understand first what you want, and then do your research to figure out where you can do the thing that you want, And so if you have a dream, I want to work in Silicon Valley tech startup, what you need to do to get a job there is going to be very different from I want to get a job at a big industrial enterprise tech company or software company or something, right? Like, or industrial company that does software. What you need to do to get to those two companies are very different, and the skills you will need are very different. And really it's on you as a job hunter or young professional to learn the requirements and then go off and figure it out, So anyway, I think it's interesting. I was like a tricky question. It was a very loaded question. So I apologize for
Okay,
that.
don't worry.
One of the
But
things,
I think what
oh,
you're
go ahead. Yeah,
saying
sorry.
there, just to like bounce off that,
Mm-hmm.
is again, it's been talking about it as kind of junior designers need to figure out what they want to do and where their place is as a result of that. That extends up to leadership and exec level, quite
That's true.
frankly.
Yeah.
And I think that typically when we talk about generalists and specialists, we talk about them kind of at the IC level. But what about kind of that leadership and exec level? Because if you break it down to the point of, well, not everyone can do everything, and that's why you need different skill sets in there, like, and people will have different strengths and weaknesses. It's kind of accepted when you talk about that at an IC level, but that doesn't happen when you get to leadership and exec. It's almost like they're just expected to do everything, and not everyone can have the full skill set of what you might be expected to do, where you're looking at design quality, you're looking at evangelizing design and educating about it, you're looking at actually running the organization and running the discipline and creating a strategy and a vision, and all of those are kind of attributes or skill sets or strengths, whatever you want to call them. And you might find a couple of people who are bloody good at all of them, but there aren't huge numbers of people that are really, really good at all of those different forms of being in a leadership or executive position. And so there's also this kind of element of self-awareness at that level to go, okay, what are my strengths? What do I want to be doing? And therefore, to your point, what kind of company do I need to be at that's going to enable me to do the type of work that I want to be doing? Because if I really want to be focusing on design quality and actually looking at just running a whatever, I don't want to go to an immature big organization where I'm going to have to spend my days evangelizing and educating and kind of talking about the value of design and the ROI, because I'm going to feel like I'm hitting my head against the wall. So
Mm-hmm.
this is probably going to scare people, but that whole conversation, it never stops at every single level. You've got to, that's
That's a
the
really great
world of
point.
the fun of
Yeah.
design. You've got to kind of keep adjusting and keep doing that kind of self inspection or whatever, so having that self awareness to kind of figure out what's the right pivot and what's the right place for me. It never ends.
Yeah. That's a really great point. And I think that's something that I think a lot of junior designers, maybe even mid senior designers don't, I think, realize is that you made a really good point there, that that conversation of, generalist or specialist, or, am I, how do I articulate the value of this or that, like that never ends. And I think that's something like we think about, like, as a junior designer, I'm going to figure out what I want. And then that's the last decision I have to make about my career.
Totally.
But this question comes and goes, and you made a really great point. You said the same thing earlier, like this applies across the board. I don't think even maybe until you retire, you should always be thinking about this question of like, what do I want? Where do I want to be? And planning your career trajectory, your ladder, whatever you want to call it. This is not an answer that you answer once, or a question that you answer once and then expect to be done with it. I think that's a really great point. I think that's something like a lot of us probably need to hear way more often. One of the things I want to kind of go back to, you said a little while ago, I think this is really interesting. This idea of go broad first, right? When you're just starting out in your career, you go broad and you try all these little things, and then you figure out the things that you really like, and then you can focus on those things. But if you focus first, it's really hard to do that. And I'm just thinking, from what I know about like watching, I don't know, like Grey's Anatomy or like medical shows, because I've never been the doctor or anything. But the interns, they kind of learn all this stuff. You go to medical school, you learn everything before you ever decide, like, I want to be in internal medicine. So like, I don't know, I'm just seeing like a lot of parallels. It's just funny how, I don't know how UX design got on this track that like, I need to figure out that I want to be a researcher on day one, or I want to be this thing on day one, and, never go back to it. But I'm just kind of curious, like, I want to hear your thoughts on that idea though. Like if you could expand a little bit on it, going broad first before you pick a specialty.
Yeah,
What are your
I
thoughts?
kind of feel like you were in that discussion the other day with us when we were talking about the product and design, because again, the one of the subjects that came up was this kind of idea of the medical field and how we're different. And actually, when you start in the medical field, you have this baseline education
Oh,
and
wow.
foundation that before you specialize and go into an area.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about this idea of product and tech, and actually is that missing from not just design but tech in general? And if everyone
Mm.
had the same foundations, would the communication and the working relationships and everything be a lot better? Because someone gave the example of like a medical team will go in, and unfortunately someone's been like given a diagnosis of brain tumor or whatever it is, and you'll have all these different specialists that will come together in a room and go, right,
Mm-hmm.
this is the, in our case, customer problem or patient problem based on
Yeah.
what we know. Here's the plan and the treatment, but it's all centered around that. And that's sometimes what's missing. Like, what is that moment of
Yeah.
value, and how do we all come together, egos aside, to put that together? So it was a bit of a sidetrack, but I just felt like you were kind of in our medical conversation the other
I was
day
listening.
with
Yeah.
your references. But to answer your question, the go broad, I think it's sort of this idea of like, you don't know what you don't know. And I think it's
Right.
not just at the beginning of your career that you have to go broad. At every level, there's a point where you just have to experience, almost kind of like just say yes to things, like experience everything that you can experience, and just try different things, because until you try it, you don't know whether you like it or you're good at it. So
Hmm.
try, go broad at the beginning, specialize, find a new opportunity, broaden up, and at every point in your career, keep doing this weird sort of like, I'm doing something weird with my hands now, but keep doing this sort of like in out thing,
Uh-huh.
specialize, generalize. And like, I mean, you've got to do it, right? Like when you get to a point where a lot of people get to, where they go, right, do I want to be an IC, or do I want to go down the management route? And then when I'm in management, do I want to stay in this kind of like management, or do I want to go to an exec? And there's kind of all of
Hmm.
these different things, and everyone has a place in that. There are people, there's a need for ICs, there's a need for managers, there's a need for execs, and everyone will find their place in it. But you don't know what your place is until you figure it out. And it's not about better saying, I need to get to an exec level because that means it's the best. It just might not be the best thing for you.
Hmm.
And you can see, I love a football analogy, so I'm just going to throw one in, but you've got like the best players in the world who go on to be horrific coaches, quite frankly. And you have some of the
Hmm.
best managers in the world who themselves are very average players, and neither kind of really cares. Like you don't see some of the top managers are out in the world trying to compete with their players or be better than their players in some way,
Right.
because they have a different place in the hierarchy or whatever it is. And everyone's there to do the best job for them. But you don't know what your place is really, whether that's from a discipline perspective or um, a track perspective. I don't know what you call the difference between an IC or a manager or anything else, but you don't know what your place is until you've tried it. So that's why I think
Yeah.
you've got to go broad and try a lot of things at every stage and just test things out.
Yeah, I love that analogy. When you first said you were going to go talk about a football analogy, I'm thinking like you're gonna start talking about soccer or something, like.
I that
And then
what
I
I
was
did
just,
mean soccer.
well,
Sorry,
right, no,
I
I know.
forgot
And
who
then
I
I
was
was
talking to
expecting,
here.
I was expecting the reason why I said I was expecting some very specific like British soccer
I tried
analogy
not
that
to
I
give
wasn't
you
going to
like too many
understand.
names, but
But then I thought about it. I'm like, this actually applies to like American football and baseball and like all these other sports too. So,
yeah,
I'm just thinking in my head too. Like one of the things that I don't know why my brain went here, but in the United States, like college football is huge, right? And one thing you never really see are coaches from college football going to the NFL professional and being successful. Like there was Nick Saban who tried it for a little while and like came back to like University of Alabama, or to Alabama and stuff. Not University of Alabama, different school. But anyway, one of those. It's just sort of again, I'm kind of thinking here about like specialized, like being a really great coach in one area does not make you a great coach, even the same sport. Like this, but
yeah.
just different levels, like NCAA or college versus professional. And that's like just an analogy that I don't know how that extends to UX design, but I just kind of thought about it and
Yeah. No, it does
thinking
though,
about like the
right?
various
Because
levels
if
and
you
stuff.
say that you might be a really great design leader in a startup world, but
Hmm.
if you go to like a very large legacy
Yeah, that's
organization,
true.
then you might really struggle there, and that might not be your place. So I think it's a great analogy. I love a
Yeah,
sports analogy, so
there
we'll
you go. Right
keep
on. All
going.
right, we're doing it. And it's funny because I'm not normally the one to come up with sports analogies. I'm very non-sports analogy thinking. I don't know how to say that.
It works.
It worked out. It worked. There we go. Okay, perfect. One thing that you mentioned on a call we had not long ago, and I think this is worth digging into. I want to talk a little bit about this: is generalists or generalizing or going and kind of going broad helps you with your network too, and like career growth that way, building your network. I wonder, could you talk a little bit about your thoughts there as far as like how being a generalist can actually help broaden your uh, your professional network to expand beyond just that one thing that you thought you were good at.
I mean, yeah, I think it's a great thing. I think it's just generally when you generally with generalists, when you spend more time doing different things, you naturally meet more people. And I think it's so important as a designer to do that. So, yet there's an element in terms of um, meeting more designers and having more opportunities to work with different people. And if I can give you an example, when I I was at an agency for about 6 or so years. And when I left that agency, I went into contracting, and I very specifically said to anyone that I was talking to that I only want very short contracts. They came and said, "What are you looking for?" And I said, "Let me just tell you what I'm not looking for. I'm not looking to do
Mm-hmm.
anything that involves UI, and I'm not looking for anything more than 6 to 8 weeks maximum. Other
Oh
than
wow,
that,
that is
chuck
short.
anything that you want at me." And the reason I did that was, well, A, because I'm useless at UI for the most part, but on the other side of things, I was very intentional about saying I've been somewhere for 6 years, and I know that my world in terms of people and my world in terms of process and ways of working and everything else is clouded around what I was exposed to there. And so at the time that I knew I was going to be contracting, I wanted as many different experiences as possible. I wanted to meet and work with as many different people so that I could kind of take all of that experience and almost like Frankenstein my own version out of that and say,
Yeah.
hey, I really like that bit of what you did, and I really like this bit of what you did over here. And how do I kind of mold that into like my process or my way of doing things? And I think that's what designers naturally do. But the more exposure you get to different things and different people, you'll do that. And it's something I think you do as kind of design leadership as well. Like you look to the leaders that you've had before, both good and bad, and you pick the bits that were good and you pick the bits that were bad and flip it on its head, and you go, right, this is the type of person and the type of leader that I want to be, or the type of designer that I want to be based on the experiences that I've had. So to yeah, with your question, like the more generalist and the more exposure you get to different things, the easier it is to kind of do that and find your way, I think.
Yeah, I love that too. When you first said short, I'm thinking, oh, she meant 6 months or something. And then you said 6 to 8 weeks. I was like, holy crap, that is super short. But one of the things like, and this is interesting because I have spent the majority of my career in one place. It was a giant corporation and I moved around quite a bit. So like I wasn't doing the same thing for like almost 7 years. But looking back on my career at the time, I thought, oh, I'm moving around. I'm getting all this experience. But really, I was getting a little different experience in the exact same place. And I think, like, now, 7.5 years later, I'm thinking to myself, like, I probably did myself a disservice from a career perspective, staying that place that long, even if I was doing a bunch of different projects that were very different from each other. They weren't the same at all. But it still was very similar versus getting a job in completely different places, completely different industries, completely different teams, completely different problems. And when I think about like the advantage that you would have had of doing that for 7 years versus what I did for 7 years, not only did you have just a bunch of different things that you did, tactical, technical skills, but you also had all the different perspectives from all the different people that you work with, all the different perspectives from the managers, the different constraints that you had to think through that were completely different. And when you spend all your time thinking that way, you then have like a larger tool set that you're able to kind of dig from and solve problems probably a lot faster, I would assume, because you've seen a lot of this, you've seen more problems and you've thought about different ways to solve them. I don't know. It's just like training your brain to think in a bunch of different ways versus staying in the same place for 7.5 years. And going now that I'm not at that company anymore, I think like one thing that I have tried to like commit to myself is doing more things more often, because I feel like even being in this industry for, 15 years UX as a UX designer, I probably could still be further along. Like I still have so much more to go. So like, I don't know. I'm like thinking out loud right now. I don't have a question for you necessarily, but those are just things that are going through my head as I'm hearing you say this. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but
Yeah, no,
not a
I
question.
completely agree with you. It's cool. I mean, so yeah, I was in one place for 6 years, and then when I was kind of darting around, whatever you want to call it, that was only for the contracting was probably for the best like 8 months maybe where I was doing that. So
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't a huge amount of time compared to the 6 years that I was in one place. And I'm the same as you. I look back at those 6 years and think to myself, did I do myself a disservice? Should I have left
Mm-hmm.
earlier? What did I miss out on? The number of people that I could have met and worked with. And I think back a lot when I look at people that have these huge networks of people that they've worked with before. And
Yeah.
in design and out design and go, I don't have that because I stayed in one place for so long and I didn't have the exposure. But then I think about, okay, well then what did I get that those people wouldn't have because I stayed in it? And I think it's that kind of like
Hmm.
seesaw flip, and there's
Right.
always positives and negatives. I probably learned more about certain things than other people would have, and saw some things in myself, and it's
Hmm.
you can't go back and change what you've done, right? So you've
Right.
just got to use it to power you on going forward.
Yeah, and just to clarify too, I don't want to say that like I wasted 7.5 years. And I think like it's funny because as you're thinking about this, I'm thinking to myself like I shouldn't have said it that way because it feels like a negative, and like I don't want to try to give anyone the impression that's been at a place for 7 years that they're wasting their time. That is not at all. But I will say this, like thinking back on it, working in that giant corporation for 7.5 years taught me a lot of things I probably would have never learned otherwise, like organization, like how to maneuver through an organization, how to network internally, a lot of the soft skills that I feel are like critical, you know. So it's kind of interesting because it's like one of those things you mentioned, like you didn't spend 7 years jumping around, you spent 8 months jumping around, and that taught you quite a bit in like a condensed amount of time. So like I guess it kind of what I'm kind of thinking in my head again. This isn't a question necessarily, but maybe you have some thoughts like if I were to go and structure my career, because that's the next thing I want to talk about. I want to talk about like career development. If I would like structure my career and actually took the time to think about it, it would be short stints and then long stints to go deep, short stints and then long stints to go deep. And kind of that idea that you're talking about with like the cycle that you were doing with your hands before. But anyway, I don't know. That's just kind of like what I'm thinking. Because there are valuable lessons to learn in those big places where you have to go, deep and learn how how systems are organized and how all that stuff works and the politics and all that stuff which everybody hates, but like that is so important to really be an effective designer. I feel like you can't just learn the hard skills and be a successful designer without those other things too, and I wouldn't have learned those things not staying in that place though. So anyway, but I want to talk about career development. So something that you mentioned a little bit before, I want to dig a little bit deeper into this, is like this idea of like going broad and all that stuff. And a lot of people are kind of confused. I want to talk about how you can do this for yourself, like as a junior designer, or let's even mid-level, senior, even, because I feel like everybody struggles with this. How do you figure this out? How do you like structure this, navigate? Do you have any tips or tricks or anything for people trying to figure out how to plan going forward, how to best, find this thing that they need to help them grow?
I'm a terrible planner when it comes to career. Like, so I'm
That's
probably
good.
like one of the worst people to
This is
answer
why I
this
stay in the
question
same
for
place for
you.
seven
So,
and a half
yeah,
years.
exactly. I mean, yeah, I'm one of those people that says like, oh, where do you want to be in 5 years? And I haven't got a clue. Like, I've got a plan. Like, I don't know what's
Yeah.
happening in a few months, let alone anything else.
Pay
Which
my
is
bills.
weird
That's what
because
I
I'm
want
an
to do.
absolute planner and list maker when it comes to like
Oh yeah.
every other aspect of my life, but not with my career. Um, so in terms of how would you plan it, I think everyone's different, right? Like some people have a plan in their career in terms of like, I want to have impact. Other people will say like, I want to make money, and that's the main thing. And I think you've got
Hmm.
to know in your gut. And some people say, I'm really passionate about design. And other people go, I like design, but it's a job and it's not a passion of mine. So I think you've got to be quite honest with yourself to start with and just go, kind of, what do I want out of this? What drives me? And then you can start to go, okay, once I know those kind of things, like what kind of steps do I need to put forward? Because you've got to know what kind of person you are as well, because this going forward, going deep, going forward, going deep, there's huge benefit in it. But if you hate going deep, don't do it. Like it's not
Hmm.
worth it. If you love to be in the depths of things, then going broad isn't going to make you happy. And there are different aspects of going broad and going deep. But to your point, like in terms of like staying in a very large organization, like you kind of have to if you want to get anything done. It's like change management, cultural change, and
Right.
organizational change, changing processes. That really doesn't happen in a short period of time. Like there's a reason why I think it fails so often. It's because these things take years and years and years. And typically people don't stay in jobs for years and years and years. So things drop off,
Right.
new people come in, new agendas, they have to get up to speed. And I guess I'm moved more towards a leadership perspective here, but things take a long time. And even if as a kind of an individual contributor, like a service and UX, if you really want to like have change in an organization, you need to be
Yeah.
prepared to kind of stick at it and be resilient and meet up a lot of like conflict might not be the right word, but people that are going to object to what you're doing, and you really kind of got to be resilient to it. And if that doesn't sound like fun to you, and it doesn't to a lot of people, then stay out of that world and find something, go into the agency world or startup where
Yeah.
things move really quickly and that feels better for you. But as I kind of said before, test out all of these things and figure out what it is. And then in terms of how you do it, I mean, to throw another angle in as well, you've got to think about not just generalists and specialists, but like perm and contract. And
Yeah.
those two aspects are really going to shape how you navigate your career. Because if you want to go deep and learn and really be kind of taught things, and it kind of depends on the leader that you're under, but typically with a contract, they're not going to invest in your training. So you will kind of, especially if you're not doing long time, like very long term contracts, you're going to just move between teams and you're going to pick stuff up. But you're not necessarily going to be trained in the same way that a perm would be trained. I remember interviewing someone recently that said, I kind of flip between the two. I get myself to a certain point when I feel like I hit a ceiling in my like contract life. That's when I go back to being perm for a while and I embed
Mm.
myself and I train myself up. And then I start going around to different contracts and different experiences to level out, to sort of learn more at the level. And then when I want to level up,
Right.
I go back to being perm. And I thought
Yeah,
that
I
was a
like that.
really interesting
Yeah.
approach to tackling this idea of going wide and going up and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So this is interesting because that idea of contract versus permanent, right? When you're a contractor, you generally don't have a manager, right? Like, I mean, you might, I guess, if you work for a contracting company, they might have a manager over there, but your manager's not going to be the person at the company that you're working with. But this is maybe I'm curious because you guys do a lot of this. This is be an interesting kind of thing for you to talk through. Your manager has to understand if you want them to help you level up in your career and stay at the same place. Obviously, your manager is going to have to be there to help you do that. And it's hard for your manager to know what to help you do if they don't know what you want. So working with them, right? So could you talk a little bit about that idea of like helping your manager help you and progress and further your career, or not even maybe further up? Like, I think they could even be like horizontally, like, I'm doing this now, but I'd like to try a new thing to learn this new skill. Can you talk a little bit about how to help your manager? And then it's interesting because maybe after you do that, I'm asking you a lot of like two-part questions. But if you're a contractor and you don't have that manager that can assign you to different things, how do you do that? Maybe you work with a contracting company. I'm just curious. Um, how do you go about doing that?
You're only testing my memory, these double questions.
Sorry.
Got to try and
I'm
think
so
what
sorry.
all the questions were now. But no,
I'll
it's
I'll
good.
help you.
It's cool. Don't worry about it.
I'll fill you in. Yeah,
Um,
we'll get it. We'll figure it out.
so first question in terms of like how you help your manager. Well, firstly, it comes back to like you've got to know for yourself what you want. Like a good manager will be able to kind of like help navigate the conversation with you and go like, here are your different options and here are
Mm-hmm.
kind of different paths. But it does help if you have a grounding to go into the conversation. Be like, okay, I don't necessarily know 100% until I tried this thing out, but here's something that I'm really interested in, or here are a couple of things. Or what I also say is like, it doesn't matter if you don't know exactly what you do want to do, but if you know that you don't want to do something, that's
Yeah, I
also
love
really
that. Yeah,
helpful, right?
yeah,
So start with yourself before you go into the conversation and kind of it's a bit like when typically you go into one-to-ones and they say like a manager should help guide your conversation but bring some topics in that you
yeah.
want to discuss, and I think it's the same in this sense. And then to that point, like help your manager, it's this idea of like managing up.
Mm-hmm.
And managing up is always kind of seen as slightly political or whatever else, but I don't think it has to be. It's just in terms of the way you phrase it. How do you help
Mm-hmm.
your manager help you? How do you make the most of your time together? So if you can direct them, because you've also got to remember this person's probably not to
Right.
their detriment or in any kind of mean way, but they're handling, I don't know how many other people in your team, all of
Right.
this other stuff up here,
Yeah.
10,000 different
Yeah.
things flying at them. You've got that half an hour with them, really focus in that conversation and make the most of it and figure out what you want out of that conversation and guide them. Because if you can say, this is what I want, then ultimately it's this partnership of And I had a great manager that did this. That said, right, you want to do this, but you're kind of like flat out with everything else. So what we're going to work out how to do is when I'm doing something that you want to do, I will bring you in and give you like 20% of that thing. And I
Oh, I
will
love
take
that. Yeah.
20% of what you're doing to give you the capacity to take 20% of what I'm doing so that you can start to see it and test it out. So there are lots of different ways that you can start to do things like that. But until I went to her and said, hey, I want to try this thing, she had no incentive, well, not that no incentive, but she wouldn't have known to offer that kind of thing to me because she didn't
Right.
know that I was interested in it. So it kind of works both ways in that sense. Your second
All
question
right. The
was
second
around
question,
contractors, right?
if you're a contractor, how do you do a similar thing if you don't have a supervisor that's doing the work with you, right?
Yeah, it's tough because you're right. You don't typically have a line manager. You'd have more of a reporting manager, and therefore your conversations are going to be much more focused on like, okay, how's the work going? What's the status update? Do you have any
Mm-hmm.
challenges? Do you need me to unblock anything, etc. Rather than like long term, where do you want to be going? That kind of
Right.
stuff. Um, so how do you do that? I mean, if you're a good relationship with that reporting manager and you're in a company where they, despite IR35 for the UK lot and anything else where they're like a bit need to treat you slightly differently to a perm team, if you've got
Right.
a manager or a company that will treat people as similarly as they can do from a perm and a contract perspective, then you might be really lucky in terms of getting some extra training and working with a team and that kind of stuff. If you don't have that, I think you've just got to look for it yourself outside, and you can do that by um, learning, going to like conferences, whatever else, trying to find other ways to upskill. Or I have a weird relationship with the term, but like finding a mentor or someone
Mm-hmm.
that can like teach you consistently, or someone that you can learn from consistently that isn't necessarily just a reporting manager, but can give you that kind of career development outside of necessarily the role that you're in for X period of time as a contractor.
Yeah. That's a good answer. Yeah, too. You mentioned IR35 in the UK.
Yeah,
There's similar stuff in the US, like co-working laws and things like that, which for people who aren't familiar, this is like, contractors can't be invited to certain meetings, or they, like at where I used to work, we couldn't invite them to parties. Like they couldn't get free stuff. They couldn't get like catered lunches and things like that because they would be
the
treated like employees.
perks.
But I'm sure it goes beyond, yeah, yeah, the perks and stuff. So yeah, there's some stuff like that, which is something to think about when if that matters to you. Some people don't care, some people do, but it's also too, and I don't know what it's like in the UK, but that's something interesting to note when we talk about like this idea of generalizing. When you're a contractor, at least at the places I've worked, they tend to keep the contractors sort of at arm's length when it comes to planning, when it comes to strategic stuff. And the contractors, unless they were hired to help with that, which some of them were, but for the most part, a lot of them were hired to just execute. Like, we need you to go build this thing in 6 months, and whatever. You may have been embedded with the teams, and you may have gone to like meetings and stuff with the team, but you generally, all hands meetings. It wasn't really talking about like the stock price and things like that, like they would with the other employees. So anyway, just kind of interesting. It's something to think about because I think a lot of people don't realize that if they go from full time to contracting, that the kind of information they miss out on as an full time employee versus a contractor. But hopefully your team is still helping you to like do your job right and stuff. Like, I don't think that stuff necessarily matters, but anyway, it's kind of interesting. I don't know, just something to think about, if nothing else. All right. So let's see. So we've been talking to you for a little while now, Laura. Any other thoughts? Any things that we haven't really touched on that you think are still worth like bringing up as it relates to this idea of generalist versus specialist, and how a junior designer, or let's say even anybody really, can start to think beyond just their very specific niche and go broad, or vice versa if they're interested in that.
I think the other thing that I'd look at in terms of like juniors or anyone in terms of broadening out or specializing is look at the people that are around you. And if you've got
Mm,
someone that is potentially doing something in the team that you're interested in, ask them. Try and, I
yeah,
mean, you
yeah.
can't necessarily shadow them on all the calls, but like try and find like half an hour and sit with them and go, hey, I'm really interested in this thing that you're doing. Can I talk to you
Mm,
about it? And that's really where having different strengths within a team is kind of this magic, for lack of a better term, and this really empowered thing that if you can learn something, you don't have to necessarily learn something from up. I don't know if that's the right expression. You don't have to look
Yeah,
up to
yeah.
learn. You can look side, you can look down, because there'll be someone
Yes.
hopefully in your team that's got some sort of skill set. And I think I'm talking about it in the notes before I dropped something in, where it was kind of like this idea of, we talk about high performing teams the whole time, or at least kind of
Mm,
when you say like what's a good leader, they build high performing teams. And it's one of, I think, a really difficult thing to define, and also a very difficult thing to actually build in a sense.
yeah.
Because what does a high performing team mean? What does differences within a team look like? And I think often it comes back to this idea of like, we've got a mix of specialists and a mix of generalists, and you've got kind of these T-shaped people and people that can just go big and go long, and that's kind of a nice mix. But there are so many little things beyond that. So like, what are people's like super strengths? What are their design superpowers? What do they bring to the team outside of being a generalist or a specialist or a service designer or this? Are they really good at like facilitation? Are they really good at this other thing, for example? So if you're someone in the team and you know everyone's strengths, you can bounce off each other, you can lean on each other, you can say, hey, I'm running a workshop, you're not on my project, we don't really talk, but can I have a bit of time? And the analogy that I kind of tend to sometimes at least try to use, that some people are like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And some people go, eh, I think it depends kind of like how into the gym world you are. It's this idea of like micro and macro nutrients. And most people focus on the macros, which are basically like your carbs, your proteins, whatever. And you can
Mm-hmm.
get a long way in your kind of nutrition journey, if that's what you want to call it, by just focusing on the macros. But if you really want to have that like super special diet and the thing that like long term, you need to look at your micros, which are your vitamins and everything else. And I think that's the same with the teams. Like, your macros are these big things, like what disciplines do you have? But if you really want that magic and that high performing team, I think you need to go that level down and really focus on what your micros are as well as your macros.
That is fascinating analogy. Yeah, you could come back on for another episode. We could talk all about that probably. We could talk for an hour about that. Oh man, that's awesome. Yeah, Laura, that's a really great analogy too. I think that's something that a lot of people, it's funny because like with I think high performing teams, the interesting thing is like you could pull these people together, right? But like at the end of the day, the beauty of a high performing team is it's really organic. It's like the people are doing it themselves. Like you've put the right people together and then they're taking it the final step. Like the leadership is not the one making that team high performing. It's the team working together to build that culture from the bottom up, right, and support each other. Which it's funny because like if you've never you think you hear a lot about like high performing teams, when you're on one of those teams you just know it, and then when it goes away you just feel it, and it's like a loss. It's like I've been on those teams before, and like when it goes away it's like almost like a death in the family, or it's like you feel like you've lost a part of yourself, like you feel like you belong in those teams. And yeah, it's a beautiful thing. Total side
Yeah,
tangent, but I could talk for hours about that too. Maybe I'll have you back
me
on. We'll
too.
talk
It's
about
fine.
high performing teams and stuff. I love it. All right, Laura. So before we get out of here, I got a lot of questions. I got a few questions that I like to ask all of my guests to help our listeners get to know our guests a little bit better. But before we do that, why don't you give yourself a plug? Let everybody know where they can find you. You post a lot on LinkedIn and all that stuff, so people should definitely go follow you there. But where else? Anywhere else you're on online that we can follow you and check you out?
Yeah, just LinkedIn. I've never been much for social media, so LinkedIn is plenty for me in terms of time and everything else, quite frankly. So
I
no,
heard that.
um, no, stick to LinkedIn. I'm not really, I have an Instagram account, but I'm one of those stalkers that have literally had it for like 10 years and never posted on it. So I just lurk in the background.
Right on.
So if you want
All
to
right.
chat to me, find me on LinkedIn. That's definitely the best place.
Awesome, and we'll include it in the show notes. But for anybody listening, where is it? Slash Laura, what's your
That's a
fake
very good
LinkedIn?
question. I think it's Laura H Baker, and I might be sending
Okay,
everyone to a completely different person, in which case say hi. But I'm pretty sure that's what it
that's
is.
okay. All right, we'll edit that out. That's all right. All right, awesome, Laura. So I've got, like I said, a few questions that I like to ask all my guests to help the listeners get to know my guests a little bit better. First up, what is your favorite non-design book?
My favorite non-design book. I have to admit, I'm not a big reader. So what would my favorite non-design book be?
Don't
I'm trying to think what I've recently read. It's been a while, to be honest.
Do you want to pass?
Yeah,
It's
I'm
your
gonna
phone
pass on
friend.
that one. Yeah,
That's okay. No problem. All right. Next question.
yeah.
What is your favorite non-design podcast? Do you listen to podcasts?
I'm not prepared for this whatsoever. To be fair, I used to. I think I listened to too many during like COVID when there was nothing else to do,
Oh
and I
yeah,
used to just
you
go
got to
for walks.
podcast it out.
They were all like true crime stuff.
Yeah, I love a
Whether
good
that
true
gives you
crime.
an interest into like an insight into my psyche, it was basically all like true crime stuff. And I used to just listen to too many of them in a row, freak myself out, have to give myself a bit of a break, and then I'd start all over again.
I love it. That's okay. I won't tell. Your secret is safe
Thanks.
with me. No one's listening in.
No
All
one's
right.
listening to this, right?
What is your favorite meal?
Favorite meal. I feel like that's like asking a parent to pick a child. Uh, it's got to be something like, I mean, I could go pretty broad: sushi, pizza. I'm probably just gonna have to go with something Italian because you can't
Hmm.
really go wrong with that.
It's true. You can't. Yeah. Anything like your family used to cook or like traditional things like that that
Chicken
you
soup.
chicken soup. All right.
Chicken soup.
Is British chicken soup different from
No, this
American chicken
is
soup? Do you have any idea? It's about the
I
same.
don't know. This is the like the Jewish side of me. Chicken soup, schnitzel, the kind of like Friday
Yeah.
night
Ooh, I
dinner.
love it.
I don't.
Yeah,
I
I love
have
it.
to admit, like even in the UK, like you go to different people's like family friends for dinner, and everyone's chicken soup's a little bit better, and then it's all this like
Yeah.
competition of like, oh,
It's always
chicken
different.
soup's
Yeah.
better than your chicken soup, but it's just what you grow up with, right, and what your mum makes. Everyone thinks their mum makes the best
Exactly.
chicken soup.
That's what I was gonna say. Yeah, I was gonna say your grandma, but yeah, your mom. Yeah,
Yeah,
anybody like whoever, somebody in your family. That's your favorite. The one you grew up
yeah,
eating is your favorite. That's the secret ingredient. Is it has to be something you ate from when you were a kid.
pretty much.
All right, maybe this one will be a little bit better for you. What is your favorite vacation spot?
My favorite holiday. It's probably Venice. I
Oh,
mean,
holiday
I've
spot.
been
Yeah,
to
there
some
you go.
places like around the world that are like fortunate, very fortunate to have like traveled quite a lot. And they're absolutely some incredible places. But my parents have a place in Venice, so it's just like the go-to
Mm.
place for me in the summer. Just go. It's a place where I literally just go and sit on the beach and chill out. So yeah, I've been a number of times, but it's an easy spot for me. So that would be my go-to.
Venice. I've never been to Venice. I guess I always
You're
assume
welcome
like I always
anytime. Let me
picture.
know.
Oh, really? Okay, I'll let you know. Can I bring my two screaming children with me?
Yeah, of course.
And my wife, obviously. What? So this is interesting because like when I think of Venice, I think of like the
The
canals and stuff,
canals,
but I
yeah.
don't think of like the beach. Is
Beach.
there a beach close by? I assume it's by the water. Obviously, there's like water everywhere.
Yeah, so like
I don't know
there's
that I ever made that
basically what
connection.
so there's lots of bits of Venice. So there's Venice in terms of like the Venice that's actually attached to the mainland. Then there's the Venice that people think of, which is like St. Mark's Square, Rialto, which is all the islands and the
Yeah.
canals. And then about a 5, 10 minute, maybe 10-minute boat journey from there is this like strip that is basically between
Oh,
the
okay.
lagoon and the sea. And that's where my
Right.
parents have a place. So it's like one
Oh,
strip
okay.
of
So
beach on the other side to where the lagoon is. So you're not in the like smelly canal water on the beach.
okay,
You
because
you
like
do
when
have the
I
sea.
when you said like, I just pictured
You're
like
right.
you and like a little like a boat like going down one of the
Gondolier, yeah.
canals with you, yeah, the gondola with your parents or something,
Yeah.
singing to each other or something like that. This is my
You
American
do not want the baker singing, that's
stereotype.
for sure. Not blessed with a voice.
Watch out! All right, that's so funny. I actually had I never realized that until just now. So that's shows how little I know about my
Well, if no
geography.
one's learned anything from this session so far, hopefully that'll be one thing that they will have learned there at the beach in Venice.
It's so funny. I actually am curious. Like the thing with podcasts is like it's really hard to track statistics. So like if everybody's watching on YouTube, I can tell exactly like how long they're watching. But unfortunately, I don't have most of my listeners are not on like YouTube or something. So I have no idea the average length that someone listens. I really have no idea how far people listen into the episode and if they ever get this far to the questions. So it's
So you need
possible
people
like
to like leave
everybody
you some
listens.
comments or something. You'd be like, can
Let me
everyone
know if
please
you're
tell
listening.
Jeremy like at what
Yeah,
point they stop listening to this?
exactly. If you're listening to this, let me know because I'd love to know if these questions are something you guys actually look forward to. All right, last question: what is your favorite design tool that is not Figma?
That's probably the easiest question you've asked me so far because the place is covered in them. I'm a post-it
Sticky
note and a
notes?
Sharpie kind of
Yeah, I
person.
love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Don't go anywhere without a post-it note or a Sharpie. So
I love that.
there you
Yeah,
go.
I'm with
Old
you too.
school.
That's yeah, exactly. Do you ever make the mistake of buying like the generic post-its, the non-post-it post-its? You ever buy those
Tell
by
me more
mistake?
about that. No. As in the
Oh,
ones with then they just fall off the wall.
they just fall off the wall. They
Oh.
never stick.
But do you know the trick
Uh,
of like how you peel them and like
I
putting them on the
saw that. I
side?
actually is funny. I was telling somebody the other day, like LinkedIn needs more memes. I actually saw a meme on LinkedIn of like how to pick. You got to do it sideways versus up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You've
exactly.
always got
Yeah,
to like pull
exactly.
it rather than peel it. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
the I bought like these generic post-its, and
Oh.
they do this. I like showing like nobody can see it at home, but the accordion thing, and it's just like it's so annoying. One because it does this, and it's just like it's like a slinky. Oh god, come on! It's like a freaking slinky, and I hate this thing. It's just driving me crazy. And then the other problem with it is that every post-it note is the opposite way. So like when you write a post-it note, then you have to flip it around. Otherwise, your post-it's upside down. It's very frustrating.
Yeah.
I'll never buy these again. I'm trying. I bought like a pack in bulk because I'm like, oh, this was great. I saved a lot of money.
Costco.
Yeah, this was actually. I think these were like the Walgreens brand, like cheap. I don't know if you guys don't have Walgreens in the UK, but whatever. I don't know what you
Yeah, I
call
know
it
what
in
you
the
mean.
UK. Anyway, never again. Like I will always
Lesson
go
learned.
like spend the extra couple dollars and buy the official post-it notes and not these stupid accordion generic ones that fall off the wall. Anyway,
Get the
all
blue
right,
tack
Laura. Well,
out.
this is there you go. All right. Well, this has been amazing. This has been a lot of fun. I'm glad Riverside worked this time
Me
so we could
too.
actually finish our conversation. And this has been fantastic. Everybody check out Laura on LinkedIn. We'll put her link in the show notes. Make sure you follow her because she posts pretty regularly, every day, weekly at least. You post
Mostly
pretty often.
days. Yeah.
There you go. Most of the time. She posts most days of the week. So make sure you follow her there for more great insights and stuff like that. Laura, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been fun.